Hello wrestling fans, you're back on the Tom Colohue channel for another Raw review. Covering today will be everything going on with Charlotte Flair, what brand she's on, who she's facing off with, in a very madcap week for the women's division. Of course, I'll also be covering Rey Mysterio, Seth Rollins, and of course, the tremendous, or at least slightly growing on me, Viking Raiders and Street Profits feud. Make sure to click like before we begin and we'll get started. Raw this week was lighter on recap than last week, which was very much a good thing, but it did contain a lot of hooks right before a break. You will see that anytime you watch through it. This shows a concern that they are losing ratings because it's a way to try and keep people segment to segment. If you analyse the rating by 15-minute block, you can see that they do pretty much continually lose people, and it's something they needed to address. Unfortunately, I don't think this is a way because it got very obnoxious very quickly. There are multiple pre-match attacks right before a break. There are multiple segments where people backstage are teasing interrupting someone. And for me, it's aggressive and it really harmed the show for me. That said, there was a lot of good and I want to go through all of that blow by blow. At the beginning of the show, they ran down the whole card, which didn't feature many matches. They didn't announce as many as I personally would have liked. Asuka entered the ring to start and WWE were literally teasing the main event from the off. That's very telling as well because they were teasing Asuka and Flair at the beginning and it was actually delivered at the end. Asuka would come out solo initially, she would be interrupted by Sasha Banks and Bayley, they would be interrupted by Charlotte Flair and she would be interrupted by the Iconics. A lot of things stacked on top of each other in this segment. Everyone got a chance to speak, including Asuka, who got a chance to really square up with Banks and Bayley, and Charlotte ever so slightly destroyed Boss 'n' Hug on the mic. In return, Boss 'n' Hug attacked Charlotte, there was a kerfuffle, and at the end of that, we got a break. So there's your first hook, I'll be pointing them out, there'll be a few. Somehow after the break, this had ended up being Sasha Banks and Bayley versus the Iconics versus Charlotte Flair and Asuka. This also became a bit of a theme because it meant that we got a lot of sections after breaks that didn't quite coincide with what had happened before because the hook was clearly written last minute, or may have even been reshot in some cases. This was a match that featured 5 heels and only 1 face. Thankfully, the face is the one that got the win. If we'd had a crowd, this would have been a very loud one, I tell you that much. Asuka won for the team, but Charlotte spent most of the match building up to a big hot tag, pulling her hand away and teasing Asuka. You don't want to tease Asuka. She is deadly. The Empress is truly deadly. What I will say, these 6 women have been getting a lot of airtime. They all were featured twice in 5 or 6 segments each. With the first half hour and the last half hour, these 6 women took up an hour of programming. This is still with no sign of Shayna Baszler, Natalya, Liv Morgan, Ruby Riott, or Bianca Belair, or anyone who may be planned to be called up or at least sideways from NXT. So while it's a great thing for these 6 women, and I think they did a tremendous job with what they had, I would like to see a few more women appearing at least on screen briefly. Bianca Belair deserves a match at the very least. We had a brief recap package of the Seth Rollins and Rey Mysterio feud, which is good I feel. They recapped way too much last week, but this week it was kept to a minimum as close as could be. It was kept interesting, which is a good way to be. Seth would join the announce panel right before the interview with Rey. Once again, very clear hook right before a break. Samoa Joe does not look impressed, and I like that consistency. At the same time, Rey calls Seth a son of a bitch. I like that their feud is just pure hatred. I respect it. WWE editing some technical issues to hide the pre-tape and the pre-recording for Rey Mysterio, which is a nice touch considering it's a satellite link. Nobody reacts to them though, which sort of makes the lie of it. It's not Rey's best delivery, he's definitely reading from a script, and that can't be easy with only one eye. Seth invites both Rey and Dominic to Raw next week, which should be an interesting little way of doing things. There are of course rumours that Dominic could be joining Team Rollins. Would be an interesting way to have him debut, I'll say that. However, the interview is then interrupted. You may hear that I didn't quite say interview as well as I'd liked there because the word interrupted is so close to it. By Aleister Black diving across the announce table onto Seth, and I have to give credit to both men here. Aleister Black for the commitment and the pace at which he charged into that dive, and Seth Rollins for not giving the game away. He would have been able to see perfectly where Aleister Black was coming from, but he didn't react whatsoever until Black was basically here. Well done, Seth. Somehow, after the break, we now have Aleister Black and Humberto Carrillo against Buddy Murphy and Austin Theory, which is a match that we have seen before. Also, where's Seth? Not mentioned. Once again, coming back from the break, it's confusing, or at least a little jarring. It doesn't gel together as I feel it should. The edit could have been better. The match is good, the match is high quality, but it's very short, only 2 or 3 minutes. Black and Murphy do tremendous things in that brief amount of time, and Black does pick up the win for his team. After that, Seth Rollins comes down to Rey Mysterio's theme, wearing the Rey Mysterio mask. Someone in the truck played that theme, and I would be asking questions of that person at this point. As a result of this, Aleister Black is distracted, and he and Carrillo unfortunately take a bit of a beatdown again. I think this is the 3rd week in a row now. Especially when you don't have a match at Backlash, it's a bit jarring. Randy Orton cuts a backstage promo where he says that he might get involved in the Peep Show segment coming up. Christian is then introduced and they go to a break, so whatever you do, don't change the channel because Randy Orton might do a word. After the break, Edge comes down to the ring and Christian full-on roasts him. He really plays him down in a similar way to the way that Edge did with Becky Lynch way back when he very nearly accidentally turned himself heel by suggesting that Becky Lynch might want to be careful as a bad girl because the fans didn't consider her bad. So, read the room. The question I always have here, first off, I think the moniker of greatest wrestling match ever is disrespectful to everyone else on that card because you're saying that they can't do it. You're saying that no one on that card can steal the show from this main event. If McIntyre and Lashley go out there and have a 5-star match, Orton and Edge ain't going to be able to follow that. I'll say that. I hope people consider that a challenge. Secondly, my issue here with Christian putting Edge down and then building him up and saying, we think you can do this, is that Edge already did. He had a last man standing match, which is more intense than a wrestling match, and he did it. So spending all this time now saying it's going to be great, Edge, we believe in you, really rings hollow when he's already proven that he can do it. Orton would appear on the screen to end the segment, and apparently he's been standing in the exact same place for the last 20 minutes. His promo is essentially all sideways, and every now and then while he's reading his script he goes like that, and then he remembers his last line and just actually talks to the screen. That said, it is a very strong delivery. You can see him getting emotional, and I think that's a very good thing. So there are pluses to that. I don't think Orton is at his best reading from a script. At the same time, it was clearly a very good delivery, and I give him credit for it. Good promo segment. It should hype up the match, and for a go-home segment for the match, it's very good. However, I just don't think they can live up to the hype, and neither, if you've been listening to recent interviews, neither does Edge. Before another break, MVP talks. We know a break's coming, so he promises us an in-depth look, an examination and a breakdown of the full Nelson that Bobby Lashley uses, which we never get. MVP is wearing a Shad Gaspard t-shirt though, which I have to give him respect for. Represent. Also, the 24/7 Championship is on screen, which is fantastic. It's cited. R-Truth appears during the segment, name drops Gronk again. I'm wondering if maybe that's part of the settlement deal that they have to drop his name in everything for the next year or so. You never can tell. And then Lashley beats up R-Truth. I know we're building Lashley, and ultimately this is a way to do it, but beating people who are nowhere near established at a championship level is not a convincing way to do it. He hasn't been given enough from Drew McIntyre. Before losing the championship, Brock Lesnar was beaten to holy hell repeatedly by Drew McIntyre. I feel that Lashley needed at least one moment like that before the match. It hasn't come. Hopefully we'll see it Sunday night. Viking Raiders versus Bobby Lashley and MVP is announced leading into the decathlon between the Raiders and the Profits. There's a recap beforehand which is actually quite a lot of fun. I've spoken on here about what I liked and what I disliked, and it's about half and half, but there is enough of the ones I do like to keep these little recap segments going, and because recaps have been used sparingly, this is of interest to me. When the actual segment comes, I do feel as though I'm being slowly conditioned to like them more and more. They contain a lot of things I usually can't stand, like their sound effects, but other parts make up for them. The sword fighting forfeit is in particular made me pop, and they're still hitting very similar things for Ivar. He's a big guy, but he's kind of cute. It's the same note, I want them to evolve. I like the fact that they do the toast before the flip cup. That shows the camaraderie and the brotherhood that I've been talking about. And really, when you're doing a face versus face feud, I think they've done this absolutely perfectly, because the respect have just built and built and built and built. The Raiders and the Profits are now tied, so I'm going to assume that eventually we're going to have a match. But honestly, I'm kind of into it now. You know, don't hate me for this, but I wouldn't mind it going for another month. Also, merch watch. Ivar at some point says, "Raise a bar for Air Ivar," which is another thing that would be very good on a t-shirt. Apollo Crews introduces the US title division seemingly in its entirety, and that's the only appearance he makes of the night. The match will be Angel Garza versus Andrade versus Kevin Owens. My main question here is, who booked this match? Who backstage or in management thought that this particular match would be a good idea? Because whoever they are, Kevin Owens might want a word with you. Xia Li gives the Perspex a little kiss next to Angel Garza, which I think is actually pretty cute. And Kevin Owens runs out and starts the attack immediately. And then there's a break, so you might want to tune back in to see what's going on there. We get a decent amount of time for this one, and it is very cleverly booked. It starts off as a handicap match, as you might expect, but that doesn't last very long because Garza and Andrade cannot agree on anything. Their argument eventually spills to the outside, they start scrapping, and Zelina Vega is the one who gets knocked to the floor. Which is a hook for a break, but also a good bit of storytelling and an advancement that I like. The match continues. Owens is able to get in a lot more offense at this point, hits a stunner on Angel Garza and then gets thrown off by Andrade. Andrade wins the match by beating Angel Garza, and he will get a US title shot at Backlash. It does seem like they've just remembered this one. However, this is another one that could potentially be a better match than Orton vs Edge. Charlotte Flair has a backstage promo where she highlights that at NXT TakeOver she wasn't pinned and she did not submit, so there might be some unfinished business in NXT there. Asuka interrupts, doing her dancing and her shouting, and Charlotte Flair asks if she's ever serious. Asuka then gets deadly serious, slaps Charlotte in the face. Charlotte seems like she respects that. I like that they've added a serious side to Asuka because she did go a bit too far the other way, and I love Asuka in that particular direction, but having that little bit more serious in-ring side will be beneficial when it comes to selling a real challenge like Nia Jax is supposed to be. Good little segment. Andrade and Garza ad-lib an argument backstage. Zelina Vega comes in, points at them, silences them immediately. She is clearly very angry and clearly still very in charge. Kurt Angle does the best job so far of hyping up the greatest wrestling match ever at Backlash by referring to chemistry that he had in the ring, that other people had in the ring, that Ric Flair and Ricky the Dragon Steamboat had in the ring. He actually did a much better job, I feel, than a lot of people so far who've been hyping up this match. Drew McIntyre has a segment with the Viking Raiders backstage, which I've got to say I very much enjoyed. Drew McIntyre would make a very good Viking, and they genuinely look very good together. This, however, once again, is a hook. Drew literally says, and I want to read this verbatim, "You might want to stick around, you might want to check it out, because you never know what might happen on Monday Night Raw." Pandering. It's pandering to an audience. This is, of course, the beginning of the third hour where they traditionally lose their most viewership, so I get it, but still. WWE advertised that Evolution will be shown before WWE Backstage on FS1 tomorrow. There is no chance that show is not discussed on Backstage, and this is definitely an interest check by the WWE to see if there's enough interest to consider Evolution 2.0. There is. Book this show. We get to the VIP lounge, and like many segments with rush matches or short things, it does feel quite truncated and brief. It may have been edited down. MVP calls on Lashley, but it's Drew McIntyre who comes out. They have a brief conversation, MVP looking confident the whole time, even though a little bit scared. Lashley tries to get an attack from behind, but Drew is wise to it. As he's talking down to Lashley, MVP makes a move, so McIntyre sees him off with a headbutt, picks up his title, Lashley does not react, which I think is quite telling. That would have been a perfect time to lock in that full Nelson. I've got to say, Lashley isn't being booked to be particularly smart in these instances. The Viking Raiders come out shortly afterwards, followed by the Street Profits, which shows a developing camaraderie between those four and now Drew McIntyre. The party has very much come to him. If we see Drew McIntyre with the red cup in future, I think that's a job well done. The match isn't particularly long, but at the same time it isn't particularly short. Viking Raiders do get some moves in, mostly at MVP's expense. Lashley does not really take much of a beating at all. There's a lovely tense moment outside when Lashley and Drew have a brief stare down before Lashley runs past Drew to spear Ivar. That, I feel, is a good moment, and it shows the direction and the intensity of Bobby Lashley. He's very focused. That is a good thing. He then does a blind tag in and puts Eric out with the full Nelson. Wins the match that way and then continues the hold, or at least gets the hold back on briefly afterwards. I believe it's on Ivar. Nobody can get him off, including the Profits. It takes a claymore from Drew McIntyre to put Lashley out of the ring. Lashley goes out of the ring. He does not go down, which is at least something of a good look. One thing I will say is that Drew McIntyre at this point gets on his knees against the ropes and starts talking. And since WrestleMania, that exact position is where I feel he has done his best work. Every time he's in that position, he cuts a great little promo. I really enjoyed that moment. The match was okay. Lashley did get a bit of a build here. He still doesn't look like a particularly phenomenal threat for Backlash though. The main event comes with plenty of time left, which could be down to the edit and could be why things have felt a bit rushed. With shows being pre-taped, it does mean they can edit out slower parts of some matches, and that means they could potentially give more time to the main event. They could potentially have filmed over what they were expected to, maybe 3.5 hours, and then cut bits out of matches to make it flow a bit better and make the matches seem a bit more intense. I certainly would in their position. Once again, Banks and Bayley are involved for the first half of the main event. They sit at commentary. I did feel watching this that Raw had actually started again at the beginning of this match, which I don't think is what they were aiming for, but it was what it was. Banks and Bayley were very good on commentary. Bayley's laugh is probably the worst thing I've ever heard, and I absolutely love it. It's just magnificent heel work. The Iconics sneak their way into the crowd. They are briefly shown on TV, but they are not referenced by Banks and Bayley until they then attack Banks and Bayley from behind by going round the crowd, hopefully social distancing while they do. It is after this moment, though, that Charlotte versus Asuka really gets to show what it's all about. These two have tremendous chemistry. I've enjoyed every single match they've had. It is a shame Asuka has never picked up the win, but that is referenced multiple times on commentary. Now that there is no one on the outside drawing your attention, we can really see what they can do. There are counters, there is chain wrestling, there is a number of submissions. They do great things. Unfortunately, it doesn't come to a clean finish. Nia Jax, making about 5 seconds of appearance and involvement in the match, does just enough to distract Asuka, who goes down to a big boot, a move which Charlotte has finished a few people off with. Asuka did actually kick out of this, so I have question marks about that, I'll tell you that much. Charlotte does pick up the win though, which begs the question, is Charlotte going to be added to Nia Jax versus Asuka at Backlash? The show ends after Nia Jax enters the ring and gives Asuka a Samoan drop, and it is Charlotte Flair and Nia Jax standing tall. I did think Raw was a good show last night, despite the constant Up TV really grating on me. This did seem to go back to quite a lot of Vince Russo tricks, and the way that he and the Attitude Era always used to try and drag people in. If the show's good, people will continue to watch. It's really that simple. And constantly teasing that something's going to happen is probably not going to change that. That said, the match quality was very high, and I feel that every division was quite well represented here. Even the tag division that is very depleted right now with only 2 tag teams really getting much of a push. There's a few people I'd like to see more of. Ricochet and Cedric Alexander, Liv Morgan, people like that who have something going on but haven't really been able to get in the ring and do something about it. My Twitter poll this week gave a 34% good rating, and in second place was a 30% okay rating. That puts this Raw pretty much right in the middle, some good, some bad. Personally, I thought it was slightly better than that, mostly due to smaller moments, like Drew interacting with the Raiders and then Rey Mysterio outright calling Seth Rollins a son of a bitch. Please let me know what you thought. Remember to leave a like on the video, and thank you very much for watching.